Welcome to the Emotions Coaching Summit 2024, brought to you by In Good Company, a global coaching training company and founder of the revolutionary Emotions Coaching Practitioner Training. If you're inspired today to continue your journey of emotions coaching, then be sure to check out our website at igcompany.co.uk for full details of that course. For now, we invite you to sit back and enjoy the amazing lineup that we have for you today from our expert speakers who are all leaders in their field. Enjoy! Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Emotions Coaching Summit 2024. We are excited to have you here and join us for this very special session on racial consciousness with Bernice, who I will hand over to in just a minute, and we'll just let you all trickle through and get sorted. So for those of you who don't know Bernice is an accredited EMCC senior practitioner coach. She is a racial scholar, an anti-racism educator, and she is founder of Raising Racial Consciousness. And I can speak firsthand for the quality of Bernice's work, as Joe and I have been working with her for some time in one of her signature programs. So Bernice collaborates with coaching training providers, hence our interaction, with leadership teams that want to deepen their knowledge and understanding of power and oppression in their practice, organizations, and in the coaching training curriculum. And I know Bernice is deeply passionate about her topic and brings huge expertise to this field. And it is really important for all of us as coaches to challenge our views and knowledge and awareness about racial equity. So Bernice, I hand over to you for what I know is going to be a provocative and fascinating session.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen with you all. Make sure I am set up and ready to go. Can you hear me okay, Zoe?
Yes, you are all good.
Super. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Really lovely to be here and with such a sizable group to be in conversation with. So thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Zoe, and for the invitation to you and Joe. I am really delighted to be here and actually to be centering the role that emotions play in our personal and professional lives. So today we will be exploring why our emotions are the key to unlocking racial inequity. Now, if we consider the significance of racial inequity in the context of our work as coaches, we see it in the workplaces we're operating in. That might be in healthcare systems that we're working in. It might be in the criminal justice system. It might be within corporations. But racial inequity is all around us. And so talking about race in coaching matters now more than it has ever done. So we are going to spend some time exploring how confident and competent you feel exploring race-related issues with your clients. We're going to look at how our emotions act as guides in this work, and also why understanding race and its function is really essential for all of us as coaches and leaders. And I'm mindful that we have 40 minutes together, and so I really want to allow some time for questions at the end. So please feel free to submit them as we go. I will try and capture them, and we will have some time at the end for questions. So an invitation to start the session. An invitation just to reflect on this statement. I feel confident and competent addressing race-related issues in executive coaching or perhaps leadership. So as you read this statement, I invite you to do two things. If you feel able, share in the chat how you would rate your level of confidence and competence, from a 1 being very confident to a 4 not feeling confident at all. So just share in the chat, where would you rate your scores here? A real mix coming in. Yeah, lovely. 3s, 2s, 4s, a couple of 1s there. And I also invite you to notice what emotions are coming up for you. And if you feel able, perhaps share those in the chat as well. So as you read that statement, what emotions do you notice? What's become present in your body? Perhaps it wasn't present before, or perhaps you looked at the title of this session and it was already slightly present. Yeah, some guilt, worry, uncomfortable, fear, a little sad, yeah, feeling fragile, awkwardness, yeah, remembering experiences, past experiences, absolutely. Yeah, so all of these emotions are really natural responses to the complex issues surrounding racial injustice. So thank you for sharing so openly. I just wanted to tap into to really test how we're all feeling as we step into this space and step into this conversation. So in our first session this morning with Zoe and Joe, they shared their first principle about coaching with emotions. And luckily it matches what I'm saying here, which is quite helpful. So emotions are neither good or bad. And for me, they are better understood as guides or teachers that really raise awareness to certain things. And the biggest blocker to meaningful change in racial equity work are what we might call our protective or survival emotions. So it might be some of the emotions that you experienced in response to the statement I just shared. So it can be fear, it can be anger, guilt, shame, I think worried, concerned, anxious, all of those came up. And these protective survival emotions that we have, they are simply a response to a perceived threat and trigger. And that's often our safety, but it can also be a threat to our identity, a threat to our worldview. So our protective or survival emotions are often tied to self-preservation, and they serve to alert or protect us from harm. So in the case of examining race, racism, and racial inequalities, these emotions are very often triggered. So when we feel fear, our body is moving into fight, flight, or freeze responses. So many of us are scared of saying the wrong thing, of offending, of causing harm. And as a result of this, we can often see silence or inaction in response to racial inequity and injustice. And there's also anger. So anger can be used as a defense mechanism to protect ourselves. We might have experienced misplaced anger if we felt challenged about our role in racism. And this can often lead to, real resistance and actually derailing of conversations. And shame and guilt are also really common responses to racial inequity work. And this is often attached to feelings of unworthiness for unearned privileges we may have. So we can shut down and we can become quite centered on our own needs in that moment, forgetting the work that we are perhaps, here to do. So these are not emotions that we particularly want to welcome in, right? Quite the opposite. In fact, we want to run the other direction. But my thinking here is that if we can hold them as our guide, then we can really notice what they are perhaps beginning to draw attention to. Something that is important to us. It's alerting us to something that we need to look at. So whilst examining race, racism, and racial inequity isn't easy, it is essential for us as coaches and leaders. So as coaches, there are two truths that we need to pay attention to. And that is, firstly, that race should not matter. So that's correct. Race shouldn't matter. Race has no biological meaning. It is a social construct. It was made up. But the other truth is that sadly, race does matter. So we see racial inequity in employment, in healthcare, in the ethnicity pay gap, criminal justice, in socioeconomic statuses. So this demonstrates that race continues to ground our social existence. Race is foundational to how societies categorize and assign value to all of us. And when we begin to understand how race has been constructed to uphold power, it actually becomes a lot easier to understand how other forms of social inequity are built and perpetuated. be that through able-bodiedness, gender, sexism, and all the other isms, neurodiversity, and so on. And Sara Ahmed says, to account for racism is to offer a different account of the world. So she's suggesting that recognizing and acknowledging racism changes how we understand and describe our reality. So racism shapes social structures, it shapes institutions, it shapes everyday experiences. And actually, when we bring it into focus, we begin to reveal aspects of the world that are often ignored or hidden in dominant narratives. So in essence, when we account for racism, it challenges existing worldviews that actually may be downplayed and may obscure some of these inequalities. So whilst it offers a more truthful and complex perspective of the world, we can experience it as a threat to the self. So this is why our protective or survival emotions can often become triggered. And there's now increasing amounts of research that are coming out demonstrating the importance of understanding the role that power and oppression have in our coaching, and also describing the harm that can be done in the coaching space if we don't invest in this learning and reflection as coaches. So there are two pieces of research that I will share. The first paper, entitled Race in Coaching Matters, shares research from 2019 that examined whether coaches had the skill sets necessary for effective partnerships with an increasingly diverse workshop. And the study found that Black clients received more support from coaches. They received less challenge in the coaching room. They received less constructive feedback. Less time was devoted to areas of development than did otherwise identical white clients. And coaches were also twice as likely to provide diversity-related feedback to white executives than they were to Black executives. So in other words, coaches assigned to Black clients chose to sidestep conversations about diversity and development. So these findings suggested that coaches' reluctance to provide this challenging cross-racial feedback may stem from a concern about appearing prejudiced. So perhaps their protective emotions, maybe fear, was unknowingly triggered. But as a result of this, the clients racialized as Black in this study received a lower standard of coaching than those executives racialized as white. And in this second research paper, this was published in 2022, and it was entitled Anti-Racism in Coaching, a Global Call to Action. And I will share both papers with everybody after this. So the core finding in this seminal research conducted by Charmaine Roche and Jonathan Passmore was that colourblindness dominates across the coaching ecosystem. And I offer a definition of colourblindness here. So it says colourblindness is a process of socialization and associated systems of beliefs that sends the message that race or skin colour does or should not matter. While the intent may be well-meaning, in practice, it denies or ignores the lived reality for BIPOC, most affected by disparities in education, employment, health, housing, and criminal justice. So we've already discussed how race shouldn't matter, and that is the truth. But in fact, race does matter. And on that basis, that this research paper in particular is really a call to action to practitioners, to trainers, to our coaching membership bodies, to really deepen our understanding to the complexity of racial identity and how our socialization in the world plays a role in this. And really to develop a deeper understanding of racial equity and belonging and these systems and structures that function to oppress. And also for us as coaches to become increasingly sensitive to these areas of race, and perhaps be willing to step into this space and be able to provide support and challenge to clients that might be operating in spaces that are anti-oppressive, but we feel ill-equipped to support. So as coaches and supervisors, we sign up to a global code of ethics that really requires us to do this critical work, to be aware of the potential for our unconscious biases, to understand systemic injustice and develop coaching approaches that are inclusive and respect individual differences. So this is the work that will allow all of our clients that we work with to ensure they feel seen and heard and valued for what they bring. And it means that we are investing our time as coaches to understand ourselves and pay attention to the things that we are arriving into the coaching room with, all of our biases, all of our assumptions that we all carry that are natural parts of being human. And we need to do this work because then we can become part of the fix. So we can become part of the fix to drive racial equity across the coaching profession, across the workplaces that our clients are in, and across wider society. So racial equity work is hard. When we intentionally step into racial equity work, we know that our protective emotions may want to take the lead, and they may want to do their job in protecting us. And actually, in being aware of this, we are better able to regulate those emotions. And instead, we can draw on more expansive emotions. So we can draw on emotions that are growth orientated. We can be led by compassion, love, and liberation. And we can look to those emotions that foster openness and curiosity, which is really at the heart of coaching and the work that we do. So when we are operating from this place, we are able to learn and acquire new knowledge. We're able to recognize our biases and assumptions. We can notice that actually our ethnocentric, Eurocentric coaching models and tools can be problematic because they're grounded in Western values that perpetuate some of the biases. And they overlook the systemic inequities that actually we see in our workplaces and in society. So when we lean into our expansive emotions, we realize that actually these privileges are not personal, they are systemic. And our capacity to understand ourselves and our client's identity and experience shifts. And then so too can the impact that our coaching can have with those clients. So harnessing our expansive emotions and quietening those protective emotions is the key to unlocking racial inequity in coaching and in our workplaces. So finally, if we have no knowledge of history, of power and of oppression, we cannot really know ourselves. We cannot really know all that we are bringing into the coaching space and all that we are taking into that conversation. So race is not outside of us. We are all entangled in these same systems. It's already here and it's already present in our coaching, in our supervision, and in our workplaces. So when we hold this knowledge and understanding, we can begin to transform the spaces that we hold for our clients. We can transform the partnerships that we form. We can transform the level of trust and the impact of the work that we're doing. So building an inclusive coaching practice requires conscious intent and action. And that really includes choosing which emotions we allow as our guide as well. And that's like all I really wanted to cover in terms of content for our session today, because I wanted to make space for people to raise their hands and ask questions or submit questions, and perhaps also an opportunity to share a little bit about me. So Zoe did an intro, thank you very much. I am an executive coach, and I also run a coach education and training organization that's focused on supporting coaches and supervisors and leaders to acquire some of this knowledge that we need if we want to build more inclusive and equitable coaching spaces. So our next program does run in November, and I would be delighted to welcome anybody from this summit who would like to join. So please, there's some details that you can connect with me here via LinkedIn or email, and you can check out the website. If you would like some support on this journey and you connect with me, I will share a few bits with you as well, some research papers, a couple of articles, and a racial literacy toolkit. So please just drop me a note and I can provide that across at the end of the week. I will pause now, Zoe and Joe, and just open for questioning if that works for you.
Yeah, thank you, Bernice. And there's no questions in the chat at the moment, so we'll hold some space for people to be able to gather their thoughts together and ask questions. I can see Gwen's got her hand up. I'll come to Gwen in just a second. And I think one of the things I'll just offer to everybody that's here today is to ask any question that's on your mind, and just be conscious of what filtering you might be putting on the questions that you want to ask, or the questions that have been bubbling inside of you, or when you think about yourself as a coach and the topic of race. I think sometimes we can even censor our desire to want to have an answer in what can feel like a place where there just aren't any answers. So I just want to extend that invitation to you all as we come to Gwen first. So Gwen, what's your question?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bernice, for bringing your amazing expertise to this space. It's such a pleasure to be able to hear you speak. I guess my question would be, I've had several supervisees who are concerned about taking up space, like in a BIPOC space as a white person, and trying to figure out how to kind of navigate, first of all, their guilt, which I always say, you know, white guilt is just an excuse and laziness. We got to move past that. But you know, wanting to make sure that they're showing up in these group programs that they're doing, but not taking away the space for BIPOC voices. Does that question make sense? Is that a question?
So you're referencing supervisees who are in spaces that are feeling as though they want to perhaps uplift other voices or make space for other voices.
Yeah, but they don't want to center themselves. They want to be able to use their presence as a megaphone, but not as a soapbox, you know what I mean? And they're conscious around like speaking during, say, Black History Month, or speaking on panels that discuss racial issues within their particular versions of therapy. So I don't know how you felt about that.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. I think allyship is something that we all struggle with, right? Because we can all be allies to different groups, underrepresented groups, depending on our intersecting identities. I think there are things that we can do. So I think, firstly, one of the most important things, if we want to be an ally in this space, is to remember that nobody needs rescuing here. So there are no victims. And it sounds an obvious thing to say, but actually all of us here are whole human beings with agency and power. So the concept of kind of uplifting others is to fight the system, right? And it's just to remind ourselves that what we're doing is removing obstacles that are in the way of those voices being heard. So those individuals can speak freely and openly and are empowered and able to do so, but there might be certain things within the system that stop that happening. So I think when we think about allyship, we can sometimes go from, like you say, white guilt. You can also go to white saviorism, right? Let me come in and rescue this person. And it's just reminding ourselves that people don't need rescuing. We just need to get the stuff out of the way that stops them from being seen or heard. And it might be as simple as, you know, somebody might say something in a meeting and the conversation carries on, you say the same thing, and that time it gets heard, right? So it's noticing that that's happening in spaces and saying, actually, that's a great idea what you said, that, you know, repeating it, uplifting it in that moment. It could simply be uplifting that voice. If we think about things like conferences and panels, I think we all have a responsibility, right, to look at a panel and go, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel very representative of society. And actually it feels a bit more like an echo chamber. So in those moments, we can say, perhaps we're attendee, it might be feedback we provide, perhaps we're invited to be on a panel and we look at everybody else and think, actually, I could do with this, and I could do with this, you know, kind of opportunity to showcase myself. But actually, that is not racial equity work and it's not allyship. There are perhaps other people that could be on that panel sharing their voice and sharing their knowledge. And so sometimes it's about stepping aside and making space for other voices. Does that help?
It does. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question, Gwen. Brilliant
Thank
question.
you, Bernice. Some questions coming through, some big questions and some other ones. So I don't sure how many we'll have time for, but if I come back up. So question here from Yaz. I found that very interesting point about current coaching models could be very Western and EU centric. What coaching theories, Bernice, do you recommend that give a more global perspective?
It's a really interesting question and valid question. I think a lot of the coaching that we do and the training that we do comes from quite a positivist worldview perspective. And by that, I mean, we kind of, some of the models we can view, well, if this person comes into the funnel and we go through this grow model, for example, and they come out the other end, then that will work for all of our clients equally. What many of those models fail to consider is the systemic inequities that we see in workplaces. So, for example, you could be coaching a Black female doctor within the NHS, and she could be expressing real challenges within her workplace. And she may not mention race. So she might just be saying, you know, it's really stressful and I've got all of this work on and it's really challenging. And we might go to strengths-based coaching, kind of look at a kind of what are the things that we can draw on to build on this person's resilience in this moment. That would be perhaps a sensible approach to take, to say, how can we strengthen this person in this very challenging workplace? We may not consider that actually a lot of that stress and a lot of the challenge that individual is facing is because systemic racism is prevalent in her workplace. Now, she may or may not know that. And I say that because we all have different levels of race consciousness. So some people racialized as Black and brown have been brought up to kind of almost say, you know, don't use race as an excuse. As long as you try hard and work hard, you'll be fine. So she may not see that and experience that, or she may actually know that that is the case for her work and her experience, but she may not feel able to share it because perhaps she shared it before and somebody may have said, well, are you sure it's that? It's probably not that. Your boss seems lovely, or, you know, and that might be quite a generous offer. Perhaps somebody else might think, well, maybe they're playing the race card, which I've heard in coaching sessions previously. So I would almost say, rather than fixate on specific tools being right or wrong, I think there is a responsibility for us as coaches and supervisors to really just broaden our ability to critically reflect and understand how we walk through the world and how others may walk through the world and experience it differently. And we would probably make different choices in those coaching moments if we brought that level of knowledge and awareness into a session with us. I think as coaches, we are quite good at holding up the mirror to our clients, and we're quite good at inviting challenge, and we're quite good at exploring difficult topics. I would say that race is the one topic that most coaches still struggle to kind of voice and name, because certainly in the UK and probably more in the global north, we just don't have the racial literacy and knowledge to often feel comfortable naming some of these differences. And I think I would say, if you feel comfortable naming and putting it into the room and you feel able to hold what will come from that, then absolutely invite that in. I guess I'm just also acknowledging that not all coaches will feel able to even take that step, and may need to do a little bit of work to get to that point.
You've alluded there to a question, I can't find it now, but this from Karen, who said, why are people so scared to discuss race in comparison to discussing other protected characteristics? And you sort of alluded there to race being one of the things. I know when Joe and I were working with you, one of the things we explored together before is like, how come race and not all the other protected characteristics? Like, why lead with race? And that was one of the things we were working on. So what would you say to that?
I mean, race is really complicated, right? I think race becomes all about our identity and our skin color, but actually race is so much more. Racism is systemic, and it's embedded into institutions and policies and practices. So I would say, firstly, when we're talking about race, we're often talking about two different parts to race. I think the other thing is we are just socialized from such a young age that race is taboo. Certainly in the UK and in the States. I mean, if you made a comment as a child, your parents would probably say, you know, don't talk about the color of the person's skin. Everybody's equal. And I think that's the message that we're given. Almost, we're taught that colorblindness from a very young age. It doesn't matter what your skin color, we're all equal. And so we all grow up, or many of us, should I say, sorry, grow up with this kind of colorblind ideology that actually all humans are equal. But then you look around the world and you see that actually that is not the case. So we can all see the news every day. We can all see how racism causes harm. Yet at the same time, we have this other belief that's very strong and true to us that says, but race doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of why I had the Venn diagram to say, no, it doesn't matter, but in reality it does. So we have this cognitive dissonance that we need to kind of bring together to say, okay, in this perfect world, it wouldn't matter. And actually, maybe me as an individual and how I walk through the world, maybe it doesn't directly impact me in a way that it might impact others. But it does impact all of us, because take, for example, the protective emotions that we talked about at the beginning. Our inability to talk about race, the fact that it brings fear and shame and guilt, is racial trauma within our bodies, because we feel so unable to hold race as a topic of conversation. So it's present in all of us. We just are socialized into the system differently, and so our experience of it is different.
Yeah, thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions, I think. I'm not sure I'll pronounce this. Arciso, the question is, how is it possible to raise my guilt, feeling of not good enough, and fear of not being able to be the coach they need because of race? I constantly feel myself being inauthentic and trying too hard. I guess I'm asking, how can I start to do my BIPOC clients justice?
Thank you for the question. That's a really big question, and a really open and honest question. So I appreciate that. I would say racial equity work is each of our responsibilities to do. So when we step into a space, a helping profession that we're all in, then there is a part of us that we have to look at, you know, our what we are responsible for and what we can control, and we choose what training we invest in and what learning we go and do. So I would almost say try and treat it like any other aspect of your coaching. If this is an aspect of your coaching that you're thinking, actually, this is a problem. And I would say, you know, I would say even if your client base is all white, people racialized as white, you know, if they're leaders within organizations who are perhaps having issues within their workspace, either directly race related or not, or they are accountable for DEI, you know, we also have a responsibility to hold up the mirror to those individuals and to support them in this work. So the work that we do as coaches, I think it goes beyond supporting those groups that are underrepresented that we work with. It's also about helping to raise this conversation and our responsibility and our role in this on a much broader sense. So I would say in terms of where to start, I would invest in some learning. I would read, I would listen to podcasts, and I would look at identifying a supervisor that can support you in this. So look to a supervisor that has this expertise so that when you go to your supervision sessions, they're able to help hold the things that you're bringing. If you're bringing guilt to the session, a supervisor that's trained in this space will hold that with compassion. And they won't, they also won't collude with you, because that's what you don't want from supervision. You want to learn and be stretched. So, you know, surround yourself by people that you can learn from and learn with. So look at the coaches that you connect with in your network. How diverse is that group of people? Or do you feel like actually maybe I operate in an echo chamber here and there's something I could do?
Thank you, Bernice. Lee, you have got your hand up, so let's come to you, Lee. And we won't have time to answer all the questions, so I'm just trying to get a great cross section of questions. So Lee, share with us what's on your mind.
Really sorry, that was an error.
Oh, okay, no problem.
She's just waving. Hi, Lee.
She's just saying hello. Okay, that's good. We've got plenty more in the chat. So I saw one, I'm scanning now. It was around the fatigue of being the only one. And I think that came from Maureen, but I can't find the exact question, but the essence of it was, yeah, how do you manage your own fatigue when you're the only one feeling like you're in this this challenge and speaking up for BIPOC people?
How can you manage the fatigue? Well, I think firstly, find your tribe, right? So I would say, again, connect with other people so you are not the only one feeling like this, because there are lots of coaches and supervisors and leaders out there who are in this space, and they're not all racialized as Black and brown. They're also racialized as white and out there and trying to be good allies. So I think connect with as many people as possible. And you can start doing that via LinkedIn. You can do it via becoming members of certain coaching communities if you know that certain communities are kind of leading the way in this conversation more than others. And, you know, in all of this, I would just say protect yourself, right? So racial equity work is tiring and it calls on a lot of personal reserves and energy. So there is something about you can only do this work from a full cup. And I think to a degree, the same is true of coaching. So, you know, there is a need to choose what spaces you step into and where you use your voice, and choose which spaces you don't.
Thank you, Bernice. And I think what I would share from my own personal experience and the work we did with you, and it seems obvious now, but didn't then, is I never felt I had the right to speak for Black and brown voices as a white person. And so if it was a case of doing racial equity work, I was in a place of like, who am I? Like I'm white, you know, I'm busy benefiting from this. So who am I to speak up? But I think it's that, who am I not, you know, and actually if more of us came together, hopefully it would ease the fatigue, widen the spread, you know. And so I think to all of us who are white, we can speak up and we can join Black and brown voices to be able to do this work as well. So it, you know, yeah, like I said, it seems obvious now, but certainly going through your work, that was an eye opener for me.
I think
Sorry,
it's right.
Maureen,
It
sorry,
sounds
Maureen had her hand up then. Maureen, did you want to respond to that?
Okay, a lot of it was sort of talked out as I had my hand up. It was more that feeling of just, I'm 55 and I've never worked with anyone who looked like me in all of my years as a head teacher and all those sort of things, despite all my efforts at recruitment and what have you. But every single time I was in a space, this is not so much as a coach, it was when I was in education leadership. Every time I was in a space where I was with my peers and this was being discussed, and I'm talking about people who have been leaders of schools for years and years and years, immediately this conversation comes up. Everyone downs tools, sits there and waits to be educated by me. Why am I the teacher now? And I think it was Salman Rushdie said, racism isn't my problem, it's yours. I'm the victim. So why are you expecting me to solve the crime? And it becomes, it's like a crushing weight over time. And it's about how can I explain to people who are coming to me to ask for my expertise and to, you know, to sort of learn from me. How can I say, why do you think that it's my job to educate you all the time? Nobody's educating me about what white privilege is. No white person is educating me on white privilege. So why is it my job to educate you? And how do you do that without the anger and the frustration being perceived as anger? Really?
Yeah, I hear you, Maureen. I think everything you've said is true and correct. And you know, there is a need to protect ourselves in this work. Like, absolutely, that is a priority. I think, I mean, obviously, I have chosen to step into a space and this is my work. So it's like, yeah, I'll educate you because this is actually my job and what I do. 10 years ago, when I was in another job and was asked to do that, that has a very different energy. Because actually, there is also, in asking that question of being educated, there's this assumption that you get it. You must get it. You must understand how this system works because you kind of get the shitty end of the stick. It doesn't mean anything. It just means you feel it more. It just means you feel it more directly. And so, yeah, I think Zoe summed it up beautifully in saying, I think very often people can feel that it's not their space to say and it's not their space to talk about race. When I would say, well, actually, the alternative is you are leaving it to others to talk about it as well as be the brunt of it. So it's almost greater responsibility to educate ourselves on this to kind of relieve that weight. Thanks
you
for sharing.
Bernice. Yeah, and I think just, you know, noticing what a respectful space this is to have such an important conversation. And I'm going to come to Sarah's question next from a practicality perspective. So, you know, in the size of the systemic challenge we have, what are some practical things that we can do? Maybe it's questions that we could ask our clients if we wanted to explore race. I've seen that come up in the chat. But to get to a stage of feeling confident talking about race openly with clients, what are some practical things that we could do? Where in the coaching process are there certain things that we can open up?
I think it's helpful for everybody to look at your own work and the work that you're doing in the spaces that you're operating in, right? So you might look at your client base now, and there might be particular clients that you think, I wonder if there's some unspoken things that are going on here now that I'm beginning to be alerted to. So I think everybody can do that from today anyway, and just notice what's coming up. I would say in terms of practice, connect with other coaches who are interested in this work and these conversations. And like you would with anything else, you know, use your network in that way. I think, I mean, contracting is an interesting idea. I do not advocate for you to leave here and in your next contracting session tomorrow talk about race. That's not something that I would say would be a sensible thing to do unless you feel you feel confident and competent and you feel it's relevant to the conversation. Because whoever walks through our coaching room and walks into a coaching room and has a seat, right? I said before, you know, we cannot assume race consciousness from somebody who's black or brown or white. We don't know what they may bring with them. We don't know what experiences they may have had. So I personally wouldn't declare kind of naming race unless you thought, well, actually, I have done some work on myself and I kind of understand that the way I walk through the world is very different to other people. And actually, I don't, you know, I'm not attached to my whiteness as an identity. I recognize that it comes with this set of privileges and benefits, but I feel that I can introduce this in a way that is not going to take me out of my body. I feel I'll be able to stay in the flow of the conversation. And I feel that if they bring then experiences or whatever it is that they bring to bear, that I will be able to hold that in the moment. So I think that's the sort of conversation that I would advise people to have with themselves. If you don't feel able to do that, then I would really recommend you do the learning first, because yeah, I would recommend you do the learning first. I was going to say you could cause harm. The truth is we can cause harm in not naming it. So it's just really important that we kind of invest in this work in a way that is really authentic and true. Because what we're trying to achieve here as coaches, we are trying to build spaces where everybody feels like they can belong, where somebody can bring their full self to a coaching session with all of the issues that might be happening in their workplace. So that's all we are trying to create. We are trying to hold that container in a way that that we can remain in our body and remain present and support them in that conversation.
Thank you, Bernice. We are approaching time, and you know, I think to everyone here in this session is to recognize that this is a step as well. Joining this session, joining this conversation, you can see from the chat there's a huge appetite within people to be able to ask these questions and have a dialogue around, you know, race and racial consciousness. So Denise, thank you so much for bringing your expertise to our session today, and to those of you who shared comments and questions. We appreciate you joining in. So yes, thank you very much. Any closing words from you, Bernice?
Just to say thank you so much. I mean, I really wanted to allow time for questions because I think that these spaces that we have together are very rare. And, you know, I'm aware that we've got over 100 people here who are engaged in quite some challenging conversations and in a topic that we're not used to discussing and unpicking. So thank you so much for all showing up and bringing your questions. And thanks to Joe and Zoe for the invite.
Thank you. So I'm going to close the session now. If you are coming to our next session, we will see you on the hour. So see you soon, and thank you for being here. Bye-bye.